Hi there everybody and welcome. My name's Rob from the Rotherham Cycle Hub.
I'm Jamie from the Barnsley Active Travel Hub.
And in this episode, episode number 3, we're going to be running through brakes with you, so talking a few safety and maintenance tips about how to look after your brakes.
Alright, so obviously your brakes are very important in terms of safety. It's the only thing stopping you and the bike securely. I'm just going to run you through the two main types of brake that are seen on bikes that you might encounter. So on this bike here, it's fitted with rim brakes. This is probably the most common type of brake that you'll see. There are different styles and types of rim brake, but the way that these basically work is that you have a brake pad that brakes on the surface of the rim here to slow you down. Other type of brakes you may see are disc brakes. I have a disc caliper here. In this type of brake, the caliper is securely fitted onto the bike here. And the same principle, the pads brake on a metal rotor that spins around with the wheel. So although they're two different types of brake, they work on similar principles in the same way, so you need to look out for similar things. I'm just going to talk to you quickly about the pad wear on your brakes, because this is probably the most common issue that you may have if your brakes aren't working correctly, and how to identify it. So on rim brake types of brake, a pad will most commonly look like this. Really easy to see when the pad has worn down or worn out. On this actual brake, it actually has a wear line indicator on the pad. Basically, when all this rubber is worn down and you get to this part of the brake, this part of the brake is actually made from metal. So if you don't notice before your pads are wearing down, eventually you'll start to notice, because your brakes will become very loud and not start to operate properly. At this point, check your pads, check to make sure they're not worn down, as that will most likely be the case. On disc pads, the same principle applies. The pads are a little bit more difficult to sight and to see. Obviously this will be located on the bicycle, so you might have to, for instance, if the disc brake is located here on the fork, you may be more having to look at an angle of your bike. It's more difficult to sight, and you may need to shine a torch in to see whether these are worn down as well, because they're in an area of the bike that may not get as much light. Same principle applies when the pad has worn down to the backing plate, which becomes metal. Your brake will not operate very well, it will be very loud, and it's time to replace your pads. Ideally, you would have noticed this before this happens. So that's just quickly some information about brake pads. I'm going to pass you over to Rob now, who's going to talk about other aspects of brakes which are important to check.
So there's a few other items regarding your brakes that are good ways to check that they're working optimally. A lot of these methods are the same regardless of if you've got rim brakes or if you've got disc brakes. So starting from your controls here, with your lever, when you squeeze your brake lever, you don't want the lever coming too far back. So if your lever's coming all the way back to your handlebars, that's often a sign that something's worn, something's not right, and you need to check into that. So either take it to a bike shop or start, have an investigate and see what's up. So starting with your lever, you want to check there. As Jamie mentioned before, what you hear is a good way to see, or a good way to be aware of anything that's up with your bike. So any kind of loud screeching, grinding noises, they're generally not good signs. So if you're hearing that, that's a sign that your brakes aren't working well. You also want to check your cables. So even if you have disc brakes and you have hydraulic brakes, they'll have a cable as well. You want to make sure there's no damage to the cables, that they're not rubbing, that they're not showing metal through or anything like that. Make sure they're in good condition. Equally, where they come down and where these cables are attached and fixed, you'll often have a bolt holding them in place. You want to make sure that they're nice and tight. Not too loose. You can always check by giving everything a little bit of a wiggle. If you do have some tools, often with these, a 5mm Allen key, you can tighten those and make sure. Similarly down here with the pads where they're attached, you want to make sure your pads are nice and secure. So with these here, you can just give them a wiggle with your fingers. If they do move, if there is any movement there, that's something you need to get checked out and get sorted immediately. That's not safe. So either tighten it yourself or get it down to a bike shop and have somebody have a professional look at it. Same thing with disc brakes as well. As you kind of come down here, you'll have the rotor to look at and the rotor to expect, much as how we did in the wheel episode there, where we had a good look at the rim. You want to check that the braking surfaces where those pads are meeting, there's no damage there, there's no cracking, there's nothing there that shouldn't be. So check all of that. But yeah, a lot of the stuff on bikes and with brakes, you can either feel by squeezing or you can actually hear, and they're normally good signs that something's not quite right. We might be doing more episodes in the future where we'll go into a bit more depth, because there is a lot to learn with brakes and things like that, but the general message is if something's not right with your brakes, that's very dangerous, and you need to get that checked out.